There's a surge in the mistrust of police by young people in Britain today.
There's a lack of trust within the police.
You know, the public confidence in policing is at an all-time low.
Young people say they don't trust the police.
But we are overwhelmingly a force for good.
We're scared of you lot. No, honestly, explain that to me.
You're a bunch of animals.
You explain it to me. You said to me.
You look cute.
Today, a wide range of topics will be discussed, all of which revolve around young people and the police force. A relationship which has a lot to absorb, but is conversed about not so much, interestingly. And joining me today to answer questions which I know many people want answered is Superintendent Lee Barnham. Lee, thank you very much for joining me and welcome.
You're welcome. Welcome to Slough Police Station.
Thank you. Now, you did tell me this is your first interview, first ever one. So thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. For the viewers watching right now who may not know about yourself, could you just give them a brief introduction about your role here at Thames Valley?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm a superintendent. So that means I'm the local police area commander for Slough. So everything that happens here in Slough is up to me to manage.
Fantastic. Now, Lee, you know this whole video, why we're here today, is about young people and the police force. My first question to you is, why is that relationship so important, you know, between yourself, the police force, and young people? Why is it so important?
Yeah, sure. Well, policing is all about people. So it's really important that we have the support of all of the community, and the community includes young people, and young people are particularly important as being the next generation. So the next generation in terms of understanding what the issues are in Slough, they are very much a part of the community. Young people can be particularly vulnerable, so we need to look after our vulnerable members of society. They know a lot about what's going on, and so they are really important in terms of us being able to keep everybody in Slough safe. But also they're the next generation, so I hope that they're also amongst the young people of Slough, people that aspire to become police officers or work for the police in the future.
Fantastic. Now, we'll get into a lot, as I mentioned in my introduction there. I'm quite interested to know, everyone has their own experiences as an individual when they're young. When you were young, did you have any negative experience with the police?
No, I suppose I was very lucky. I grew up in a very close community, a very safe community. And so I was fortunate that I didn't have any adverse experiences with the police. And actually, I can trace my desire to be a police officer all the way back to when I was a child. So for me, becoming a police officer was always my ambition. I wanted to be a professional footballer, but that was never going to happen for me, unfortunately. But policing was something that was always there for me, as something that I really wanted to do. So I only ever had positive experiences, and I remember seeing the community beat officer when I was growing up and being almost in awe of what that officer stood for and what they represented. So I guess I was very lucky in that sense that I grew up in a safe place where I didn't have any negative experience.
Well, that's good to hear, but I think the truth is there are some people who don't have that same experience as yourself, and I think it'd be wrong of me to not mention that from the get-go, especially with everything that's going on. Perception is important. You know, what we hear so often is what influences us, and it's what we think. And what I mean by that is a young person doesn't have to go through a negative experience personally. If something happens, you know, it causes a huge outcry. And it's been a tricky period for the police force, not just nationally, internationally. If I just go through that quickly, if you're okay with me going through a list of events, you know, with the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, that was massive. And then more, you know, nationally, the abuse and strip search of Dr. Duff, the rapist and murderer Wayne Couzens, the racism and misogyny at the Charing Cross station, the failings contributed to the death of victims in the Stephen Port case, the controversial handling of Sarah Everard's vigil at Clapham Common. The list can go on and on. The problem is we're not going to gain anything from me listing all of these problems. It's more about the solutions, what we'll be doing from going forward. And I understand that these events didn't take place within Thames Valley, but ultimately the public see Thames Valley, the Met, as the police. There is an overlap with what you do. And I guess it's a positive, you know, when I was researching, I couldn't find any slips for Thames Valley. That is a good sign ultimately. But the thing is, there are problems there. in the wider police force, which is why I think it's fair to say that, you know, the public confidence in policing is at an all-time low. That's suggested through the crime survey of England and Wales, so that's backed up there. And Thames Valley Police being the largest non-Met force, surely these, you know, horrific string of events which are listed, they must create some sort of animosity and misunderstanding of the work you do at Thames Valley. So what are you doing to change that perception here in Slough?
Yeah, okay. So what I would say, policing is really complex. We are dealing with human beings. We're dealing with people in very difficult and emotional situations, and it's, you know, it's fair to say that we don't always get it right. And you're absolutely right, Amrit, that it doesn't matter where something happens in the country. If it's negative, it reflects on the whole of policing. But I would say that some of the things that you talk about, I'm appalled by, and actually I know that 99.9% of my team here would also be absolutely appalled by what happens. So, I mean, there's a whole range of things that we could unpick there. You know, who would have thought that an event in America would translate into opinion here in England and Wales? But that's the kind of society we live in now, where global issues can impact on a very, very local level. And so public perception is really important, and public trust and confidence is really important. We can't police unless we have the trust and confidence of our communities, because it's our communities that tell us what's going on so that we can react and do something about it. So when it comes to things like racism, homophobia, misogyny, that is absolutely not something that will be tolerated in our service. And we have a very robust complaint system and discipline system that will deal with those kinds of issues. Slough, as you know, is a very, very diverse community. That's what makes it such an amazing place to work. So building relationships with people in the community is really, really key for me. And that's what we're trying to do. We were talking earlier about the impact of COVID and how that's stopped some of those really good interactions that we would have wanted to have. We're rebuilding that with an independent advisory group. So we listen to the community, we get people's views, and through that we'll understand what's happening and we can address some of those concerns. And actually, some things can be about perception. People can see one side of a set of events. And actually it's quite useful when we have the opportunity to reply and have a conversation like we're having today, where I can put across a different perspective of how we feel about something or what we're doing to try and tackle some of the problems.
Fantastic. And we will be getting into the community side of that and, you know, the diversity side of Slough. The next thing I want to put forward to you is social media. It's you know, you can't ignore what's going on social media. In the past year or two, I've seen multiple posts, particularly from young people, on the police force, whether that's an encounter they've had with them, most of them being hateful. And what that's done, it's created a negative social stigma, and a culture is being embraced by particularly young people, but all sorts of people, to hate the police, despite their personal experience. The fact is, these posts are going viral, and I think one of the main reasons why it's so important for you to meet here is because you don't get your voice heard enough when it comes, you know, it's sometimes only one side of the story is heard, which isn't fair. And for me personally, I know the police force is a force for good, and that's not because I'm here in front of you, it's because of my experiences with yourself. It's because I've been part of the Youth Parliament, it's because I've been attending meetings and community forums. You probably know that, I'll put the photo on the screen right now. We met, I think it was the first time in 2019, when I believe you were a deputy.
Yeah, I was acting up at the time, but yeah, I was the deputy here, yeah.
So, you know, we had that connection. That connection was built. The problem is not many young people like myself have that same experience. So what are you doing to ensure as many young people are getting a similar experience like myself, rather than just from social media?
Yeah, okay, and I think that's a really fair set of comments. So social media is a great thing in one sense, in that it does allow us to understand the feeling and get an understanding of some of the things that are happening. I know that the overwhelming majority of my team here at Slough come here to do a really good job. They come here to protect people that are vulnerable, and they come here to lock up people that are doing wrong. And if you don't have that ingrained in you, and you don't have that desire to want to help people and protect people, then policing is a really tough job to even contemplate doing. So I know that through all of my police officers, they have that fundamental belief, and that applies to whoever they are dealing with. So the thing about social media, like you say, is that it does only show one side of the story. So, you know, you might see an encounter with a police officer in a stop and search situation, for example, which may look like it's not being conducted in a way that is respectful or fair. But what you don't see is the reason why the officer is there in the first place. So, for example, you don't know whether they've been called to someone that has got a knife. And of course, they've got to react really quickly to that and get hold of someone in order to make sure that everybody is kept safe and that nobody else is harmed. So it does only tell one side of the story. But what we will do is where we pick up on social media that there's something the community aren't happy with, or there is any apparent misconduct on the part of an officer, we have a very robust system for investigating complaints. And we will proactively look at those. So we won't necessarily wait for a complaint to come in. If we see something on social media that doesn't look quite right, we will make sure it's investigated. And it's not investigated by me. We would look at it. I would make a referral to our professional standards department, and they will conduct a review of what the evidence looks like, and they will make a determination about who investigates it. If it's serious, if it looks like someone has committed what we call gross misconduct, which is very, very serious and could result in an officer losing their job, then professional standards will investigate that independently of me being here on this local area. If it doesn't look like it's that serious, it will still be investigated by a senior officer locally who will look into the circumstances, talk to the person that was the subject of whatever happened, talk to the officer and come up with a way of dealing with it. So we are really keen to look at that. And if anybody feels that they haven't been treated fairly or with respect, then we have a system of making a complaint that you can do online through the Thames Valley Police website, and we will look into that and we will look to address those kinds of issues. But you're right, you're absolutely right. It does only tell one side of the story, and quite often there's a bit more to it, and with explanation, actually, people can understand why we do what we do. And that's why we have things like, for example, the Independent Advisory Group that sits at Slough, and it's members of the community that come in. We have a set agenda, and we talk about issues that are affecting the community, and it's an opportunity for people to raise with me issues that they're aware of that I might not know about, and we can look into them and investigate them if we need to, or provide an explanation. And one of the things I'm really keen to do with that is to bring in some young people to be part of that group as well. So that's one way that we can connect. The other things that we're doing in terms of working with young people, so we run something called the Mini Police, which is where officers go into primary schools and they work with young children around what the police are about, and they get a mini police uniform and they understand what our role is in the community. And then a bit older than that, we have the police cadets. So we have young people that come and join as cadets, and they get involved in neighbour policing activity. And again, we hope that they're people that might well become the police officers of the future. So there are a number of ways in which we engage with young people already, but I am absolutely open to other suggestions of how we can do that better and how we can listen to some of those concerns that people have. But we are overwhelmingly a force for good. We are here to look after people. We're here to protect people. We want everybody to feel safe in Slough, whether you're a young person, old person, male or female. It's our role to make people feel safe and respond to people's concerns.
And coming back to the social media side of it, am I correct in saying you have a department who works just on social media posts, or is it temporarily? How does that work?
Part of our communications team.
Okay.
So, of course, social media is a big way that people connect these days, but our corporate communications team deal with a whole range of media type inquiries, which does absolutely include social media. And if there's something that comes up on social media that perhaps doesn't look right or is slightly adverse to Thames Valley Police, then that gets flagged to the relevant people to look into and try and address it.
Okay, I'll let you have some water.
Thank you.
I've got something interesting to put forward to you. To get a bit more credible information to see how the young people in Slough are really feeling, I took out a school survey. This was sent out to 8 schools in Slough. Got overwhelmingly good amount of responses, 1,814 to be exact. There were 3 questions I put forward. Just a heads up, I want to get your initial views on each response to see what you think of them. The first question was, do you feel the police are a force for good? That was the question we put forward first. 26.3% said no. The second question being, do you trust the police? 41.4% said no. The third question, do you feel the police treats you as young people fairly? 34% said no. Obviously focusing on the no's because that's the bit we want to focus on. What are your initial views on that?
So, I would like all of those to be 100% yes. I'd like young people to think that we're a force for good, that they trust us and that we treat people fairly. Broadly speaking, what it does say is that more people than not do think that the police are there for those things, that we are a force for good, that we are trustworthy and that we're fair. But you're right, it's the no's that I'm really interested in. So I would love to know from those people why it is that they say no. What is it about what we do that's led them to think that? Because it could be what you were talking about, Amrit. It could be their perception. It could be what they see on the TV. It could be what they read. It could be what they see in social media. So the really important thing for me is to be using these forums that we have and bringing young people in to talk to us about what's going on, to find out why those people say no and see if there is something we can do about it, whether it's giving them a different point of view about why they think that, or actually really understanding what it is that doesn't make us trustworthy in their eyes or fair, and really understanding that in a bit more detail.
What I found really interesting about these findings was, do you feel the police are force for good? Only a quarter, well, just over a quarter said no to that. However, when it comes to trust, that was where the problem was. So it seems that young people do feel you are a force for good. It's just not there with the trust side. Now, staying on this topic of trust, as children, we are told that a police officer is someone you look out for if you're lost or in trouble, because they are the people who will keep you safe. They are who will get you home safely. How does it make you feel when you hear that some young people just don't trust the police?
Yeah, so, and we are still very much here for that. I would always want a young person that was in any form of trouble to go to a police officer, and I can tell you absolutely they will get help. They will be helped by a police officer if they need it. So, but the link is clearly if there are people that don't trust us, will they actually go and ask for help? And that's a really important thing that we have to break. So of course I don't want people to feel that way. That's not what we're here to do. We are here to help people, help to keep people safe and to support the community. So again, it's about me wanting to address some of what those concerns are and understanding a bit more detail why they don't trust us. I suspect that a lot of it is probably about what they've read about what's happening in policing. And I totally understand that. I can understand, and it doesn't just go for young people, actually more broadly, there is that trust and confidence in the police has certainly been damaged over the last 2 years. And that's something that policing needs to work really hard to rebuild. And I want to do that with young people as well as other people within the community, because that is so important. But I would say if a person is in trouble, they're lost, they need help, then a police officer will always be there to help. That's our duty.
And I think the fantastic thing is, despite a person's view when it comes to policing, when in an emergency, the police will always be there, despite the person's, they could be totally against the force.
Absolutely.
An officer would always be there with, dealing with the situation as best as possible.
Yeah.
But there are some people who won't do that. I know people personally who in an emergency wouldn't consider calling the police. They'd rather take matters into their own hands, which is quite sad because in Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing, principle number 2 states, the ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent upon approval and respect of police actions. If there is no approvance, if there is no respect, it makes things a bit tricky. So what is your message to the group who may not consider the police when in an emergency?
Okay, so you're right that the founding principles of policing come from Sir Robert Peel, and they're well established, and they were around in 1829. They are really, really old principles, but they absolutely hold firm today. Look, my message is that taking matters into your own hands is a really, really dangerous place to be. It leads to all sorts of problems. And actually, if people take matters into their own hands, they'll end up in more trouble than the person that was causing them problems in the first place. So my message is look, if you are stuck, contact us and we will help. And hopefully by the way that we respond, we'll show to those people that actually we are there for good, and we are there and we're trustworthy and we're fair. But I absolutely cannot say strongly enough that the wrong thing to do is to take matters into your own hands. And actually, if it ends up going really badly wrong, and somebody ends up committing an offence themselves and they end up in court, then the court take a very dim view of people who take matters into their own hands. So I need people to contact us. I need them to tell us what's happening. I need them to tell us if they feel unsafe, so that we can do something about it. Give us the opportunity to do something positive. And I think we'll probably talk a bit later on about some of the specific things that we're doing that I think will evidence some of that, Amrit, that how we do go about trying to help people.
I mean, we'll get into the actions a little later, but first, what I want to touch on is stop and search. Probably one of the biggest topics when it comes to young people. Stop and search comes into mind all the time when thinking about the police. The official 2019 Peel inspection on Thames Valley Police by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, the most recent one due to COVID, it found that minority ethnic individuals are 2.8 times and black people are 5.5 times more likely to face stop and search than white individuals. So that's, a pretty big contrast there. I'm sure you're also aware of the recent disturbing case of Child Q, the 15-year-old black schoolgirl from Hackney who was strip searched while on her period by police without any appropriate adult supervision, all because she smelt of cannabis. Nothing was found. This doesn't seem to be an isolated incident. A Freedom of Information request, which was submitted by criminology researcher Tom Kemp, found that between 2016 and 2021, the Met carried over 9,000 strip searches. That's a massive amount of strip searches. But the problem, which seems to be, to me, is of those 9,000 searches, 35% of those were on black people, despite only 13% of Londoners being black. That's almost triple. I think it's really important for you to make clear why are some people searched and others not. What is it you look out for?
Yeah, okay. So stop and search it's been a very controversial police power for a very, very long time. And in fact, stop and search legislation came in to address what used to be called the Sus Law. And the Sus Law had really no boundaries attached to it whatsoever. So stop and search came in, it's legislated for, and the procedures are very strictly laid out in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So we spend a lot of time training our officers around stop and search when they first join, and then in refresher sessions around stop and search, because we know how controversial a power it is. Equally, it's an important power, because if you think about it, so you need reasonable suspicion for certain things in order to stop and search someone, but you also need reasonable suspicion to arrest someone. So stop and search can be used as a way of not needing to arrest. So it's less of an infringement of someone's liberty to do the stop and search than it is to take away their liberty and take them to a police station under arrest. So it has that effect, but it's got to be used very sensitively. And you've cited there, Amrit, the case of Child Q, and there are some very, very tight restrictions around how we conduct strip searches. So, for example, if we're going to remove someone's jacket, their outer clothing or gloves, then it has to be done in private. So it can't be done just in the street. And
sorry, just to add on that, does an adult need to be supervised if it's a child?
Yes. So if it's a child, we will ask them if they want an appropriate adult. They may say no, and then it's a discussion about whether or not that's the right decision or whether they should. But the legislation sets out that if it's a child, there should be an appropriate adult. So absolutely. And also, it should be 2 police officers of the same sex as the person that's being searched. And the way that they conduct that strip search has to be done in a very respectful and dignified way. So, for example, we would never ask someone to take just all of their clothes off and stand completely naked. So officers are taught to take top layer off first, replace that, and then do the bottom half of someone's clothing. So that is how it's supposed to be. It's not a very nice thing to have to experience. It's not a very nice thing for officers to have to do. But sometimes it is necessary where there are grounds to do it, but there have to be grounds to do it. So all of that is set out very tightly and subject to scrutiny, and there's a lot of scrutiny around stop and search, and rightly so. The other really important thing about it is that stop and search, it's not random. Our stop and search is intelligence-led. So if I give you an example, if there is, say there's a call to Windsor Road in Slough, a report of a robbery with a knife that's just happened, officers are sent out and they get told that the initial description of the person that's responsible is that they look like they're in their 20s, they're a white person, and they're wearing jeans and a black top. So that information is really crucial because yes, stop and search is a really important part of our investigation and powers, and the public would expect us to try and find the person that's responsible. But with that description, what we wouldn't then be doing is stop and searching someone who's black, because they don't match the description. So therefore, you wouldn't have reasonable suspicion that it was that person that was responsible. Does that make some sense?
Yeah.
So it's very much intelligence-led based on the information that we have. Even our Section 60s, so you've probably heard about Section 60, which is a slightly different power, and it's designed to combat particularly knife crime. And that power is slightly different because we're able to search anybody for no specific reason within a given area to try and prevent any knife crime. But again, we will only use that in an intelligence-led way. So we will restrict it to an area where there has been knife crime, and it will be based on what the intelligence says about who is responsible for that knife crime. So we're really, really careful about it. It's not random. And just to pick up on the disproportionality, which you mentioned at the start, in Slough, actually, those numbers are slightly different. So in Slough, if you're black, it's just over 1.5 times more likely than a white person to be searched. For someone who identifies as having a mixed background, it's 3 times more likely than a white person. But the numbers for mixed are much smaller. But if you're Asian, it's 0.8. So in Slough, you're less likely to be searched if you're Asian than if you're white, which is all about the demographic of Slough. And in addition to that, when I looked at the last 12 months figures of the age range of people we search, we searched 182 people under 18 in the last 12 months, compared with 545 aged 18 to 24, and over 1,000 that are aged over 25. So you can see that actually the number of young people that we stop and search is actually much smaller in the grander scheme of things.
One of the best feelings for me is when I'm scrolling through Twitter and it's on a lot of networks from the police and a weapon is found through stop and search. So it just proves how important it is, but when it's done properly.
Yes.
And when it isn't done properly, if a young person does feel they haven't been treated well during a stop and search, what is the best way for that young person to go about it? Or even any person, it doesn't matter who it is. If they've had a negative experience through stop and search, what should they be doing?
Okay, so I absolutely want them to tell us about it. So through our website, there is a very clear way of making a complaint. And you can put in the details of who you are, what happened, and that will go to our professional standards department, who will conduct an initial review of what that complaint is, and they will decide whether it's so serious that they should investigate it or whether it should be investigated locally within Slough by one of my senior officers, and we will absolutely look into that. We will talk to the person that's been searched, find out what happened. You'll see that our officers now are wearing body-worn video, and they must wear their body-worn video. So it's my expectation that all stop and search encounters are recorded on video. So we will have an actual representation of exactly what happened.
And is that just in Slough?
As across the Thames Valley.
I think that's really important to highlight, because it gives young people some sort of assurance.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes they don't have a phone on hand, so knowing that, it's really clear, good to highlight. Now, knife crime, another thing we can't really ignore. It's an epidemic, isn't it? Something I'm quite passionate about, I've mentioned a few times in my videos. It's a big concern for many around Slough, particularly because the cases involve young people. A lot of them do. What are your team doing to tackle this issue? What solutions do you have in place to eliminate a crime which has such a traumatically permanent ripple effect on the victim's loved ones? And that's the sad thing about this knife crime. You know, it's the way the young person or the victim is lost. It's a brutal way, isn't it? What have you got in place to tackle this?
Yeah, so I've been back at Slough now for 2.5 years, and when I first started here as the deputy, we'd had the awful murder of Elton Gassage in Salt Hill Park, and so over the last 2.5 years we've been working really hard on tackling knife crime. There hasn't been a knife-related murder in Slough since January 2020. And some of the things that we've been doing are working really closely with the council and with our partners, because this is an issue that is not just for the police to resolve. And actually sometimes when it comes to the police being involved, it can be a bit too late because something bad has already happened. We want to get ahead of that. We don't want it to get to the point where we find a young person carrying a knife, or even worse, someone is assaulted with the knife being used. So some of the things that we've been working on very closely, we have something called Operation Sceptre, which is a national campaign, and part of that is a knife amnesty. So we will have bins around different places where people can dispose of knives that they don't want to carry any longer.
Sorry, could I just touch on that before we move forward? If a young person does choose to go to, you know, a positive change in their life, if they carry a knife currently and they want to, as you say, dispose that, get rid of that, what is the best way to do that? Is it through those bins?
Well, it is. It's to not have one in the first place, because you don't need to have a knife. The law has changed around possession of knives. So if you've got a zombie knife at home now, it's an offence to have it at home. So yes, those bins are a really good place to get rid of those. Or if you don't want it, you can, because the bins aren't always there, but you can contact the police and we'll come and take it away.
And in that case, how much trouble would they get into?
Well, if they're going to give it up, then it's unlikely that we will do anything about it, because the aim is to get knives off the streets and out of people's possession. Of course, it will depend on individual circumstances, but the whole point of this is for people not to have knives, and that's what we want to happen. But the other things that we've done at Langley, for example, is we've got young people involved in what we call test purchase operations. So they will go into retailers and we will test whether retailers are prepared to sell a knife to somebody that's not old enough to have one. So as well as doing the education, we're bringing young people into resolving some of the problems and being part of that solution. We've done some work with Crime Stoppers. So they have a programme called Fearless, which is specifically for young people. And those that don't know anything about Crime Stoppers, they are a charity where people can report crime anonymously, and they do not tell us in the police who the source of that information is ever. But working with them, we've run a social media campaign, and they can send out anti-knife crime messages on things like Instagram and TikTok based on postcode. So we've done some work with them to get that in Slough. We also have what we call a serious violence cohort. So where there are young people that we know are involved in knife crime, we will allocate an officer and they will work with that young person to dissuade them from being involved in any of that kind of activity. So we start with support, we will look to divert them, we will look to find them meaningful opportunities, whether it's helping them look for work, helping them with going into a particular sport. We will do all of those things to divert them away from being involved in knife crime. But ultimately, if they don't and they carry on, then we have to go to enforcement. So that as a very brief overview is some of the really key things that we're doing, working with young people and not just being about enforcement. We're not just about going around and catching people. We want to educate and we want to help people.
Fantastic. Want to move on to the community side of this now. It's paramount. It's absolutely vital for you to understand the community. Without that, you can't connect with them, you can't get to know them. As you know, Slough is one of the most ethnically diverse towns in the country, actually. So how have you at Thames Valley Police had to adapt to that demographic?
So the diversity of Slough is one of the reasons why, for me, it's the best area to work in the Thames Valley. And I started my career in Slough and learnt so much from starting my policing career here. And you're right, it is uniquely diverse, it's enormously diverse, which is one of its greatest strengths. But it's like any area of the Thames Valley, in fact any area of the country, communities have their own particular issues that you have to be aware of and attuned to from a policing point of view, in fact any public service point of view. So this is where bringing the community in is so important. It's why my independent advisory group is so important. It's why going into schools is so important. It's why going into community hubs is so important. That we meet with the community and we are face to face with people. And it's one of the unique things about British policing, and one that I'm really proud of, is that there are some countries where you will go where you can't approach a police officer. You can't have your photo taken with a police officer because they will just tell you to go away. It doesn't happen like that in British policing. We want people to talk to us. So those are some of the things that we do with the community. I also have here a community and diversity officer, Coolbeer, who you know, who is very much in touch with people within the community from diverse areas of the community, who we will very often reach out to. They will reach out to him if there's a problem and we can deal with it. But also if we've got some concerns about something that might be happening, we've got a network of people that we can go out to try and understand what's happening. So it's really important. And of course, everybody has different perceptions of the police. Some people are frightened of us for cultural reasons. But my message is we are here to help people. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you reach out to help, we will do our very best to help you.
Looking back, when I was young, in primary school, secondary school, the thought I have when it comes to the police, I remember they used to come and visit us in schools, in assemblies. Obviously, due to COVID, in the past couple of years, things have changed. Is that something you plan on bringing back? Because for me personally, that was pretty good. That was, you know, from a young age, seeing you guys.
Yeah. We still do it. We do still do it. So, and there are a number of ways in which we also have a much stronger relationship with young people now. So, for example, we've got the mini police programme, which is in primary schools, aimed at 8 to 11-year-olds. And there's a mini police uniform that they wear. It's voluntary, but we use that to talk about particular issues and talk about personal safety and all of those kinds of things. And we try and build that trust with children at a very young age. And actually across Slough, we have a police community support officer who's allocated to every primary school in Slough. So, of course, we have to prioritise, but there is still contact with schools. We also have a dedicated schools officer who works with secondary schools in Slough. And that officer has had lots and lots of dealings with schools. It's PC Sloan, and I'm sure a lot of people watching your channel will know who PC Sloan is. We also run a cadets programme for 13 to 18-year-olds. So that's, as you would expect, a bit more intense than the mini police. It's a very structured programme, and we involve the cadets in some police work. So they go out and they do some neighbour policing type initiatives. They get involved in our test purchasing operations, which is where we'll send somebody in to go and buy a knife underage and see if the retailer knows the law and whether they say, I can't sell you that. So again, that's another way of getting young people engaged with policing, and I hope that they come on to become police officers of the future. So we are still very much in schools. One of the things I'm really keen to do is for some of my police constables who regularly go out and carry out things like stop and search to go and talk to young people about what they should expect when there's a stop and search, and for them to explain what they will do, what the rules are, and how they can expect to be treated. So that stuff is still happening, Amrit. It is still going on. We've still got police officers going into schools and talking to young people because it is so important. And we want to create that feeling that young people can come to the police when they're in need and they're a bit stuck.
That's good to hear. We've covered a wide range of topics, as I said in my intro. It's been great to hear. My final question I would want you to answer straight directly into the camera is a final message to all the young people watching from Slough. Majority of the viewers will be young and they'll be from Slough. I know my channel demographic. So what is your message to them straight into the camera?
Okay. So to the young people of Slough, what I want you to do is to feel confident that if you need some help, you're a bit stuck, or you're afraid for your safety, that you contact us and give us the opportunity to help you and protect you. And the other direct appeal I would make to you is to think about a career in policing. There is great potential in Slough. Policing is a fantastically diverse career. It's exciting, it's very different, you'd never be bored. So please have a think about your career and think about policing as an option.
Lee, thank you very much to yourself and the comms team actually, because this is something you could have said no to. It's not something you had to do. And the fact that you said yes to this video, to this idea, automatically proved to me that you have a positive mindset, a stance, a framework of making positive change in the community. So that was very good to see. And I'm sure many young people watching this video would feel a lot more connected with yourselves. So yeah, I look forward to the next few months and seeing where your team go. And I will keep a close eye, and hopefully we can come back and cover something that happens.
Good stuff. Thanks, Amrit. Thank you.